Welcome, everybody. I'm enjoying being with you this morning or this afternoon or wherever your time zone takes you. We're going to be talking today about the art of shaping requirements, which is one of my favorite subjects. And it's also one of the probably the more difficult and challenging things that we do in the world of business development. And we're going to be getting into the subject of what we have termed the Mars methodology, and I'll explain that here just in a little bit. Let's see. There's my introduction. I'm not going to go over that again and get my pretty face off the screen. What are we going to be doing today? Well, I'm going to follow basically a three-step process. So the purpose today is we're going to try to convey some knowledge to you about the art of shaping requirements, what it's all about. You know, what the outcome I would hope to achieve with everybody today is for you to walk away having a better understanding or a good understanding of shaping requirements and what we use in terms of the Mars methodology for doing that shaping. And then we're going to talk a bit about the process of the requirements of shaping and applying, and how you apply that Mars methodology. One of the things that's important when you're doing shaping is to understand and use whatever business development lifecycle processes that your company has. Hopefully you do have those. If not, then let's talk after on that subject, because that's something that I'd like to help you with. And the key is having that process, knowing where in the process that you can actually engage with your client, where you should be engaging with your client, and then having that process move through the business development life cycle with a series of what we call gate reviews. Some company calls them step reviews, some milestone reviews. But the importance is that those become your on and off ramps for either at some point discarding the opportunity or making sure that it's passing certain criteria to move on. Because ultimately the goal here is to move from what is classically known as an unknown position with a customer, taking it all the way up to what you want to be in, which is the favored position with the customer. And you're shaping the requirements so it puts you in that favored position. And you want to try to do this all before a draft or a final RFP is certainly released. So it's very, very important to think about that. And the idea here is to start early. And you'll hear me come back to that phrase a lot during these next couple of minutes or so. So what is this thing called shaping requirements? Well, I'll talk about what it is, and then I'll also get into some ideas about what it is not. So most likely many of you have heard the term wired for us. So if you're shaping the requirements, that's exactly what you're trying to do, is get into that position where this thing is really set up for your company by the time the RFP is released. And there's a series of events that you can go through, ideas that you create, and you collaborate with your client to make that happen. And that's when, if you see an opportunity come out like that and you had nothing to do with it, more than likely someone's been shaping that opportunity, so it's actually wired for them. So you have to find out that early if you're thinking about going after it, because you may not want to spend your valuable dollars doing that. So what are some of the ways that you can go about shaping your requirement? Well, way in advance of that draft RFP or tender being released, you can do that by really looking at, can I do things that will steer that acquisition to the right kind of vehicle for my company, the type of contract for my company, but it still needs to benefit your customer. So you have to always keep your customer in mind when you're shaping. So for example, your customers tend to have goals for socioeconomic type companies, small business, small disabled veteran-owned businesses, hub zones, 8A contractors, and so on. So if they're not meeting their goals, and you happen to be one of those where they're not meeting their goals, then you try to get it set aside in that area for your company. You want to position the types of things that you offer that they need into that solution set, the requirements and whatnot. There's ways of recommending language in the RFP. It might be things around how the instructions are written. It might be things like qualifications of people. It might be evaluation criteria and so on. So you can look at that. But one thing in particular I want to point out is, above all else, make sure both you and your customer remain within whatever the law is for the state, locality, the country you're in, and all regulations, and also be very ethical about what you do. Because I've seen companies really get into trouble because they cross that line, and there's no reason to do that. And again, make sure that whatever you're doing benefits both you and the customer. Keep your customer in mind. I mean, as someone that's out there doing BD, you would love just for them to do a direct award to you if you can. So that's the ultimate shaping experience, when they don't have to do a competition. In the end, you may have to go through a competition. So in the process of shaping that, you could still set your company up for it, so you're best positioned to write the best proposal, and in the end get scored the highest and with the best value type price. So what is shaping not, for example? Well, it's certainly not just waiting until you see something like an RFI, a request for information, or a source of SOC come out, or a market survey. It's certainly not just, responding to questions and comments when a draft or a final RFP document set comes out. It's not just attending pre-solicitation conferences, industry days, or if your business is doing things like where you need to go out and survey a site, going to site surveys. It's just not meeting with your competimates. Those companies that can sometimes be your competitor, other times they're going to be your teammate. We kind of coined the phrase competimates. And then sometimes you can actually take your customers to lunch or dinner, or go play golf with them if they're allowed, but be careful because you can cross the line there too. And it's certainly not just responding with a proposal. Now, all these things in themselves, when brought together, are still part of shaping, but not just by themselves only. So you want to, this is the really kind of, I view these activities on the screen here are really kind of later in the game, in my opinion. You really need to be shaping even before that RFI source of SOT announcement hits the street, because the old saying is, if it's out in the public, someone's probably already known about it before that ever occurred. So this thing called the Mars methodology, it's something that we just came up with. I happen to be a fan of the planet Mars. I've always loved looking at that, and I hope one day we do get to explore it and with humans on. And I know that's the plan. But I thought, well, how could I take that and make it into a methodology? So I'm from the Cold War time, and there used to be something called mutual assured destruction. Well, I didn't want to do that, but I kind of use the word mutual here, and it does make sense, because when you look at the mutual part, that's where all the right people in the company, your client personnel, have to be working together in a very positive and ethical and legal manner within whatever ground rules are set for your organization, their organization. Do it very ethically and do it in a very positive fashion, and work together toward that common objectives of coming up with what the requirements are. And so this is the first part of the plan that you create, where you got to start considering who, when, and where the shaping is going to occur, and then eventually how, by focusing on that collaborative environment with both your clients and all their stakeholders as well. Now, the assured part here is when you get all the parties actually working together to develop the requirements to benefit everybody, and not just one side or a limited few. You want the clients to have the best benefits here. And this is also part of the planning process, where we are again trying to determine and further clarify who, when, and where this is going to happen. And then the requirements themselves. I'm going to get into a lot of detail on this here in a little bit, but this is where you really try to control the various things that can be shaped. And that's the big what. And then the actual shaping process itself. That's the application of the set of tools, the processes and techniques that you can bring, as well as the people. So it's the who and the how, at the right time, being applied at the right time, and the when and where against the items we want to shape, and that's the what. So mutually, I'm going to dive into that a little bit here. This is where you're really creating that collaborative environment. Now, all of the procurement agencies around the world, actually, everybody has acquisition frameworks and rules and regulations and processes they must follow. So, here, I couldn't cover everybody. So there's just a generic life cycle type model that's based on the US federal acquisition life cycle and what happens during the 5 basic phases prior to, remember that, prior to the final RFP being released. Now, like I said before, most every company should, or hopefully has, some sort of a BD lifecycle process. And what I've shown here is a very generic, very high level model again. And I covered that already a little bit. But during the MARS part of the mutual process part of MARS, you have to find the most common intersections between whatever BD lifecycle model your company is using against what your customer's acquisition lifecycle framework looks like. So you have to kind of marry that up. And so the shaping of the requirements varies across that lifecycle based on when you're able to meet with the clients and the users. And I like to include the end users here because let's say if you're trying to shape some sort of an application that your client wants, who are going to be the users of that? And should they have a say in what those requirements are? And the answer is yes. So that complicates a little bit more. And so you have to learn everything early on you can about your customer. And then you get into what their needs are, what their wants are, what their motivations are, what their hot buttons are, and so on. And then you also, in parallel, have to start learning everything you can about your competitors. So you want to learn how to play something called offense and defense and counter what their offerings might be. So I'll get into that also a little here later. And it's, again, I'll say it again, it's absolutely critical that you actually start early. Because if you wait until the draft or that final RFP is released, then you're way behind and you're going to have little or no chance of actually being able to shape anything other than what might happen with a couple of questions here and there. But then again, everybody else is going to see that activity. Also key is having the processes and where you understand who does the shaping, when they can do it, and actually filling that pipeline and moving these deals forward throughout the process. And again, when you actually move them through the process like this, you get the other people involved, they understand what's going on, and they actually can help internally at times. And again, remember our goal is to get over here to where you have the most favored position with your client, because that puts you in the best place to be able to actually get to the point where you can write that proposal and win. And remember the context of the gates. Those are a good place where you can do the off ramps if it's time to abandon the deal, because you just can't get there from here. So the earlier you can do that, the better it is for your company, because then you're going to get into a situation where you're not spending all the BMP against that opportunity. You can go use your hard-earned money somewhere else. And then the insured part here, this is where you have to work together as a team. And the team size is going to vary, and I'll talk about that a little bit too, but it's going to be based on the size of your company. It's going to be based on the size of the deal you're going after. But you want to be fair and open here about how you do your shaping together. Because I talked about a set aside earlier. If you can't get a set aside for your type of business or even a sole source back to you, you do want to assure as best as you can that your company's ability to win the procurement is done by collaborating very closely with the client to shape those requirements. And again, focus on what benefits them as well as you. And then keep in mind, sometimes you really have to approach the shaping of those requirements that's also going to benefit the, let's say, the economic category that your company's in, or the industry in which you operate. So sometimes you have to think about the bigger picture here of what's best for the industry too. Now, when you're assigned to a BD capture team and you have to work together, you have to lay that framework out. You actually approach this and create that plan to set your shaping strategy. So one of the things you can do is you set up a really good call plan and all the activities associated with that call plan. And then of course you work the plan. I mean, if you set up a plan and don't work it, then why are you setting up a plan? So you always have to work that plan. And then you come together as a team using that common plan that you have forged, and the team should have forged together. and all the ideas you have, and you start, creating that plan and honing it further. And then you have to go out there and start the activities and plant the ideas with the customer. And we call it that fertile ground. And you just don't plant it and walk away from it. You have to nurture it. Just like if you're a farmer, you're going to nurture that field and make sure that it, can be fed as much as it possibly can. If you have to go water it, or if you have to fertilize it, and so on. You also have to together take the path as a team, striving toward those goals that you've set, and overcome the challenges that lay ahead, and keep that end goal in mind of achieving that winning result at all times. So keep the team focused on the ideas that you're laying out there and where you're trying to get. So that whole thing about what we're going to shape, the what, that's a big list of areas that you can attack. So depending upon your business, you may have to look at a whole set of specifications. I come from a background where I worked at Siemens. Some of the jobs that we had these hundreds of thousands of page specifications to get through, and that's beside the regular RFP items that we normally work with in the industry. So you really have to have a lot of people looking at that, sometimes highly technical folks as well. So really you have to look at that plan overall and gear that toward what the customer is looking for, what the competition might be after, and what you want to do. And so how do we really actually know what we want to shape? Well, as you can see, there are all these categories that we can go after. And we have to consider each one with regard to what is the best mesh within our strategies that we're looking at in such a way that it's going to, again, benefit both us and our client. Now, anyone who plays any type of a strategy game, let's use chess for an example, knows there are a lot of pieces on that chessboard to move around. But there are a set of rules, again, that guides how that piece can be moved across the board. And so you have to think way ahead, create different strategies to try to take down your opponent. Same thing here in BD. I look at the world of that we live in. There's this game of BD chess. So it's really critical to look at the strategies and how you implement them. So we have to really talk to the ideas here of the things that are part of the strategies. And we call this the strategy wheel here on the right, because all of these individual items contribute to forming your overall winning strategy. And if you do this right, they mesh up nicely based on how you're shaping it. So for example, you look at something like the technical approach, and let's say a staffing approach. If you look at a staffing approach where the customer, when you transition into the new deal, they want the staffing there from day one. And so can you do that? Or if you're the incumbent, that should be easier. But if you're an outsider coming in, you have to think about, well, can I get all those people on board quickly enough on day one to have the whole solution ready to go? So you have to really kind of look at that and align your strategy with the customer's requirements and what you can and cannot offer. And the idea in the end is to end up with this overall win strategy that is going to be implemented with your overall solutions based on how you've been able to shape the opportunity. So let's talk about when and where you can shape. And again, I'll look at the fact that you've got this overall idea of that business development lifecycle. And shaping is going to happen on opportunities you decide to pursue. And then again, I'll say be wary of throwing good money after bad opportunities. So the earlier you can get the bad opportunities out of your pipeline, you can focus on shaping the good opportunities first. So, but I will stress this, you've got to be prepared to shape opportunities at every time you're going to have any sort of client customer contact, whether it's a phone call or even if it's an email, or, hey, what happens if you just happen to run into them someplace at the local Starbucks? Have your what I would call the 15-second elevator speech ready, just with a certain point of, maybe it's even, hey, I need to set up a meeting to talk to you more about this. And that leads to a meeting. But look at whatever your process is, whatever your life cycle is, look at those points where you can get in and talk to your client. and look at the ideas of how you're going to talk to them, what you're going to talk to them about, and your call plan should point that out to you, and then that way you can go forward with it and understanding how you're going to approach that. And when you're talking about setting up a call plan, don't just think about just a few of the BD folks off the whatever the capture team looks like, but how can you use the rest of the company? Very senior executives sometimes can be effectively used in that call plan. Other leadership, other technical leadership. There might be occasions where you can actually bring in really good teammates that have good contacts and whatnot, if you trust them dearly, if they're a trusted contact or a teammate for you. But look at the right points where those meetings can occur. But one of the things when you do get a meeting with a client and you're talking to them, have the right questions prepared, ask those questions, and then be quiet and let the customer talk. One of the worst things that can happen when you're trying to have that interaction is that you're just going to try to shove a solution down their throat. You're going to take all the time talking. They don't get a word in. You probably won't get another meeting with them, more than likely. The idea here is to get in there, talk to them, ask the right questions, listen, be prepared to have something that you might be able to leave behind. But based on what you're hearing, you may want to go back and revise that before you hand it to them. So the old good thing is, if you can get asked to provide them something, that gives you a chance to go back and update it and then get it to them as quickly as you can. And then always try to book a meeting from a meeting, because that lets you stay in front of them, continuously progress that opportunity down the path of shaping it the way that you want it and hopefully the way they want it. And then if the customer has a whole set of meetings laid out, participate in every meeting that you can, even if it's open type meetings like pre-solicitation conferences, site visits, and so on. Be there, be in front of them, be present, because you don't want them to forget who you are. Okay, let's shift gears here and talk about some of the tools and techniques that you can apply. In every meeting, again, it should be an opportunity to shape, and I'll get off of that topic here, but be prepared for those discussions. The idea is to try to get that 30 to 60-minute meeting scheduled. One of the best things that can happen is if you've done your homework and you're talking to them, and they've set aside 30 minutes for you, but it comes down to about 25 minutes to go, and you start talking about, well, yeah, we're respecting your time, and I know we've got to wrap up. And they said, no, let's keep going. That is one of the best things that can happen to you, because then they're engaged with you, they're listening, and they're probably liking what they hear. So always go into that meeting with your agenda. If you've got topics, have those laid out. Doesn't mean you have to give them something in advance necessarily. If you actually take a simple technique, and if you remember one of the slides I showed earlier, the purpose, outcome, and process. If you have a simple diagram or a couple bullet points, and that's how you set your meeting up, they'll understand where you're heading with that. But you haven't given away everything at that point. That's what you want to do in the discussion when you're asking the questions and then talking and having that dialogue with them. And again, be prepared to bring others with you. In fact, one of the techniques is never go alone. At least have one other person or two people with you. And the reason is, while you're talking or you're asking a question, others can be listening, and people will hear different things. And you always want to get together after a meeting with the client and compare notes, and then get that stuff documented in whatever system you're using. If it's a simple note back to the team, great. If you have a customer relationship management tool, CRM tool, document it in there. One of the good things that can come out of this is, there are tools like, the white papers. Responding to RFIs are often good too, as you get closer. But, being able to give them unsolicited white papers that help shape opportunities is a very powerful tool when used correctly with your clients, assuming that they allow that. Some don't, some do. You just have to find the ways of doing it for them. Sometimes they just want simple ideas in an email. But then, just be careful with those, because you never know where those are going to end up as well. But always go after them and submit good, useful comments against draft RFPs when they do come out as well. Hopefully everybody has some sort of a knowledge management repository. So all these things that you've done before, you can go back and see, well, how did I address that type of situation prior to this? Is there something I can reuse? But be careful if you do reuse material from that repository, make sure you update it so it doesn't have somebody else's name in it. I've seen that happen, and it can be kind of embarrassing. Believe it or not, some larger companies actually use lobbyists. Some don't like it. Others do. They use them effectively. I don't know if that's going to change here in the States as much as it has in the past, but we'll see where that goes in the future. It's going to be important to involve the right team. I've talked on this a little bit. Some companies have very small teams, and because they're not that large, and they may not be going after huge opportunities. So you don't need a large team. So on the left, you can see the typical small capture team that might be formed to go after an opportunity. But if you think about the big boys of the world, the Lockheeds and so on, they go after really large deals. They have tremendously large capture teams often, and probably even larger than the one I've shown here on the right. But the idea is just to right size the organization for both your team and the opportunity. And then, set about looking at who am I going to engage in this team at the right points in time to help shape, the opportunity by coming up with those strategies. And so how do you involve them? Who are their roles and responsibilities? The idea here is to just define this. This can be part of your capture plan. It should be, so for example, what is some companies call them business developers and client executives. The idea here, they're the ones out there finding the opportunities, gaining the intelligence on the customer and the competition, and then doing some of the messaging. And they should be involved in the opportunity all the way through to the end, in my opinion. But people need to know each other's roles. In some small companies, the BD person might also be the capture manager, who might also be coming from the line organization. So he might be a program manager. I see that happen a lot. It doesn't mean they can't do that. It's just they need to know when to pivot between their roles, and the other people on the team need to know what their roles are. So just make sure that's well defined and everybody understands who's playing what roles. It's similar to any kind of a team sport. If you're supposed to be the goalie, you shouldn't be the guy out there, trying to shoot the puck down to the other end of the net if you're talking about ice hockey, for example. Okay, you heard me say something about playing offense and defense earlier. You have to be able to pivot. You have to have two different playbooks, actually, when you're going out there in this world of BD. So for example, if I'm looking at, as an incumbent, I talked about this thing about staffing earlier on. If I'm going after my incumbent deal, I should be able to offer staffing day one with all my incumbent people, assuming it's the same type of requirement. So if it's a 100-person deal and I've got all my 100 people and my customer likes them, I should be good to go. Now, if I'm coming in from the outside as the competitor, can I provide those? I want to try to get the requirements set up so I have time to transition in, and so I'll probably want only the 100% requirement at the end of transition, as opposed to me being the incumbent. I'm going to try to get the transition plan to say staffing has to be provided on day one. Now, will the customer, go to the day one? I've seen some of that happen. Sometimes they kind of split the difference and say, instead of a 30-day transition, we'll do a 15-day transition. So it kind of meet halfway. And where does all that stuff appear? Well, it's going to appear in places like your instructions to offers in section L, we call it here, the evaluation criteria, or section M. And sometimes you'll see it in other clauses in the contract, like section H. But you have to be able to look at these types of areas and be prepared to shape that way. Now, I'm going to talk about at least one of these stories here. One of my favorites is, I'm going to talk about two, actually. I'm going to talk about a good ending and a bad ending. I was involved in a very high-level project for a client, a company I used to work for. And we were going at it with one other big company. We actually worked earlier to bring all of the incumbents together. This was a situation where the agency was bringing something like 15 different contracts together on one big single award contract. So we got everybody except this one other big company together on our team exclusively. And we also got ideas into our customers' head about higher weight on past performance and a higher weighting on the technical areas, and also a higher number of key personnel resumes being required. That appeared in the RFQ. We got all of our incumbent teammates locked in, and in the end, we won. The other big boy tried to protest, and the agency told him, don't bother. Everything was done above board, and we went forward and won. And I believe this contract is still held by that former employer to this day. Conversely, a not so happy ending is when I was with another company trying to capture a new area for them. And we had several great early meetings with the acquisition office. We knew that the technical organization, which was in a different location, wanted very high innovation. And so we had things that were placed into the early RFIs that kind of seemed to lean toward us. But the problem ended up, we couldn't get to the price points, and we didn't understand the price points early enough to react to them. And in the end, even though it was just still us against them, and we both made the best and final cut, if you will, our price was still way too high. We just couldn't get there because of not understanding what the competition was really going to do, and buying into that and trying to counter it early enough. So again, it goes back to being able to play offense and defense in both cases. Another example here is if you want to get some really good information into sections, the instructions and the evaluation criteria. If you had a very neat discriminator, like you were the only one who had a certain type of a training academy, you'd want to set the hooks for that kind of thing in the RFP language, and then make sure that the language is specific enough that you have all the relevant criteria met in section L and M, and then that the instructions are incredibly clear so the hook can be set, and then the same thing in M. So when the RFP does come out, you've got the high ground here. It's going to be hard for a competitor to match up to you. So you really have to be very aggressive in those kinds of cases. Now, here's some specific language. I'm not going to read this to you. You're going to get the slides. But the idea is to hone this in over time. When you write your first draft of what you want to eventually send to the client as an idea, you'll probably be in the good category, but look at ways to finally hone it down so it's better. And look at how that they evaluate you. If they're doing a combined technical and risk evaluation, don't forget to talk about the risk areas. Just focusing only on technical, for example, is good if they don't have the risk addressed. But if they're doing that combined risk rating, really look at how you can also say, yes, it'll be evaluated this way from a risk rating perspective. And so you're prepared for that when the RFP finally does hit. Now, recompetes versus new business. I mean, we've all been involved in probably both sides of this area. I would take a new business opportunity any day myself. I don't think that's as difficult as trying to go after a recompete. And one of the issues is that a lot of companies get what's called incumbentitis. They don't think they can be beat. They don't think the customer wants any change. They may be like the ostrich burying their head in the sand. There are no problems, or they'll go away on their own. You have to be honest with yourself. And one of the big things to understand is whether you're going after new business or whether you're going after recompete business. From the first day you win the deal, that's when you start, setting yourself up for either success or failure, because your recompete actually starts the day you win the contract, the day you start performing. So you have to start setting yourself up from that point on. So here, for example, a lot of incumbents just want to bid status quo. They don't see any need for innovation. That change is too risky. But if I'm coming in from the outside, I'm going to look at, well, what could be improved over what's being done now? How can I tell a good story and be more of a thought leader for that agency that I'm proposing to? So you have to really kind of take a different view at it. And again, apply both offense and defense to how you're approaching this. Now, looking at some potential ways you can make improvements and innovations where you can exceed requirements. Well, our job is to try to find the right type of improvements and innovations that can be brought to an effort that are going to exceed the requirements and help us score very high. Because if you look at definitions of how you get strengths, it's about exceeding the requirements and providing benefits to the customer ultimately. But you have to balance that against those minimum requirement scenarios that might be out there, knowing full well most companies can meet the minimum requirements, but that rarely cuts it unless you're in what's called a low price, technically acceptable evaluation scenario, where all you have to do is meet the minimum requirements and be the lowest price. So it's going to be very critical to perform well on that existing contract and exceed the status quo that I mentioned earlier. Always look for places where you can improve and exceed the requirements. It's going to be important to provide these innovations, be the value added person, company, be the thought leader, and create a scenario where you have that the customer is going to have that sense of value that, man, if you don't win, they're going to lose you and they're going to be in trouble, and they don't want that to happen. So you want to keep that thought in their mind, not in a threatening way, but just make it a natural idea of what's going on in their environment. One of the important parts is to learn that you have to understand how a competitor might be challenging your proposal. Remember, it goes back to early on, really gathering the competitive intelligence on your competitors and assessing them as many steps as along the way as you can. As a bidder, you've got to remember to be on both sides, defense and offense. In this case, you've got one capture team, so you have to know the right team members that can play both offense and defense. Some people are really good at one or the other. Some can go both ways. Same thing on like football and soccer teams. It happens all the time. So you have to have two kinds of playbooks essentially, but you have to know your competition to the point that you really understand them. And you're going to have a good sense of what they might offer that could challenge what your solutions might be. So you have to come up with ways of countering, what their strengths could be, and find ways of neutralizing those strengths with your strengths. Because if you can take their strengths off the table and you still outscore them because you have more strengths, or you have a really top discriminator that is a true discriminator, no one else has it, that's where you can score really high. I just put up one of my favorite quotes out of The Art of War. And the second part's one I really like the most here is if you know the enemy and know yourself, your victory will not stand in doubt. And if you know heaven and know earth, you may make your victory complete. And also, most wars are won before they're actually fought, by the way. If you do the plan and go out there, and then the execution should be much easier if you really planned it correctly. So some key takeaways I want to talk about here. Make sure that you understand the fact that the idea of shaping, it never really stops. And it's just like proposals, they never really end. They continue even after you deliver them, because you should be looking at, when preparing for what's going to come next. There might be questions. It might be a transition into a new contract. But shaping should always be going on, even after you submit, by the way, because there's still things that can be done when you get questions back sometimes as well. Remember to create a plan, just like any project. A capture environment is a project in its own right, just like a proposal is. So create that plan of how, who, what, when, and then where you're going to shape. And then remember, this is a team sport. It's not a one man or a one woman sport. Pull together, even if it's a small team of two people, work together. Understand the objective, work toward that objective, and then understand each other's roles and responsibilities along the way, and communicate. This is where a lot of teams actually break down, as they fail to communicate. And then ultimately shaping the winning strategy and that solution, it's going to be comprised of all those parts. Remember that strategy wheel. That's where the solutions pop out from. But just like any kind of a puzzle, you got to integrate them in the right way. And they've got to be integrated with the customers in mind, because in the end, you want the customer to own that solution. They should think it came from them. And remember, just like in business intelligence, you want to understand not just your competitors, but you want to understand your customers as well. So you have to look at both. And then remember, if you don't have that strong performance, it makes it really difficult in our BD world. So make sure that the performance is going strong. Make sure you understand any weaknesses of performance early on, because that way the shaping can help potentially solve performance issues before it becomes too much of a problem, and it's going to be even harder to win a recompete, for example. And then the biggest thing is ask for help. I'm a big believer in people asking questions. And, I don't view that as a weakness. I think it's a strength for an individual to recognize the fact that they need help. Every business development team should ask for the right kind of help. In fact, that's another good use, by the way, for those gate reviews that I talked about earlier. A lot of organizations that I work with use that as a way to let their executives be directly available to be asked for help. And a lot of them are asking that question themselves of the team. Where can we help you? What kind of help do you need? And be willing to be ready to answer those questions should they ask them of you. So that is all I have today. I hope you've enjoyed this. So Bhaskar, I think it might be time for some Q&A if we've got some questions.
Yes, Len, thank you so much, Len. This is a fascinating show. I mean, shaping, as you know, could be slightly outside the box for many of us, but the way you nailed it was brilliant. What is shaping? How does shaping relate to the different roles that we play, the different phases of the BD life cycle, and also how shaping is different to recompete versus new business. Finally, we also share tools, examples, and lots of stories behind it. So thank you, Len. Let me start with a few questions. So the very first question, then please do ask more questions in the chat box. The first question from Christian, which I thought is brilliant. When the final RFP comes up, what type of evidence should companies look for to see if they or other companies have shaped the proposal?
Yeah, good question. That's one of the things that the gate reviews can be used for too. When you see the draft of the final RFP out and you've been giving ideas to your customer, are you seeing those ideas appear in there? If not, then your shaping may not have been working, and that may make you reevaluate. Also, if you're seeing new ideas pop in there that may not have been either in the early RFIs or may have not been in the draft, and all of a sudden they're sitting in there in the final RFP, and you're like, where did that come from? And so you have to take a step back and look, well, can we counter that? So that's good. Always do the analysis to see what's happening. And then sometimes some companies will ask the same types of things. So if you find out early on that one company is doing this all the time, then you maybe can come up with a solution or a strategy to kind of counter that. It's a good question.
Thank you, Len. Hope it was useful, Christine. So I'll ask the question that could be in everybody's mind, which says, what role does a proposal writer or a proposal manager play in shaping?
That's a good one. I just went through that last year. I was actually ended up being the proposal manager on a real big deal, but I worked early on with a capture manager to come up with shaping ideas. And I'm always a big believer on really large deals in particular. Bring your proposal manager or maybe a good writer in early if you can afford it. And that's always a big if with some companies, but because you want to get the right kind of language. And so a good writer can really help you, but a proposal manager there being involved, who's going to be the one that's really going to take the solutions ultimately and incorporate them in the proposal, makes it a much easier process in transitioning from capture into proposal. So it really helps gel the team a little bit more too. So I think there's a really good role for a proposal manager or a good proposal manager / writer there.
That's good. And I hope that was useful. Thank you, Len. Len, the question is, how do you understand, this is from Carrie Ratcliffe, how do you understand what the competition is going to do, figuring out the right price point for you bid?
Thank you, Carrie, for that question. That is one of the more difficult things here. And that goes back to understanding competitive intelligence and business intelligence in general. And Most small companies struggle with that. Most mid-sized companies do, and even some big companies, but the big companies tend to have fairly robust business intelligence solution organizations that their job is to really track that information and look at that and how to incorporate it against different opportunities. So if you're working in a larger organization that has that, involving them early in the process to gather that information and applying that to the deal is going to be real key. Looking at things like price to win. If you're looking back at historical pricing of other companies against these types of deals, and then can you get into that range of what the price to win might be? May be a bid no bid for you at that point. But same thing on the technical solution or management solutions. If you understand how different companies are approaching those types of areas, and can you do something similar, or can you do something different that will still be compliant, but it can be even more compelling? But you have to have time. If you don't start early, you're not going to have time to probably get there. I hope that answers your question, Gary.
Thank you, Len. Hope it was useful, Gary. Len, question from Vanessa. What are your recommendations regarding best collaborative tools to use and store information, especially in our very virtual world of global business?
Yeah, it's amazing. There's something about Teams that I just love personally because of the connectivity back into SharePoint sites. And so we have some good luck with that. Smaller companies have been using simple OneDrives, but again, if you have what Microsoft 360 completely 365 installed, then you can go across the board and share information, and everybody can actually be seeing the same file, and sometimes unfortunately working in the same file at the same time, which there's a little technical issues that happen there, but that's one of the things. I haven't had a lot of exposure to various databases, but it seems to me that right now things like SharePoint sites seem to work for most smaller companies if they're implemented correctly. I know I'm open to ideas because we're always looking for better tools to use myself.
Thank you, Len. As you rightly said, as Vanessa pointed out, there are so many tools available, but it's about experiencing what works for you and your culture and your company. So that's good. Len, a question from me, Len. I mean, like shaping, as you know, it's what we call like a T-shaped bidder, which is like it goes far out on the comfort zone of a proposal manager, because most of us will be much more happy to write proposals based on the requirements in front of us. Whereas shaping means it comes with lots of additional capabilities that we need to build. What advice would you give? What advice would you personally give? What sort of skills are required that we need to build on to include shaping part of a capability in our career?
I think it's just understanding the process. I mean, if the proposal manager can get involved and be a part of the team and look for the ways that he or she can contribute in that process will be good, because it's understanding the process first and being exposed to it. Because when I was brought up, I was brought up as a proposal writer initially because I was also a program manager. And then I got seduced into this career. And so then I started getting involved in business development. And that's how I got involved in shaping by actually building relationships and understanding the needs of the clients. And at the time, I didn't know that I was involved in shaping, but now looking back, I understand that I was. And so then understanding how to get involved. And then I took the road to become a proposal manager. So I kind of came into the proposal management field a little bit backwards. And now I'm involved across the board is the roles that I play. So I think it's important that you, if in the confines of your company, opportunities, if there are ways that you can get in, even if it's to help kind of keep track of the information with your capture manager and BD folks, and then looking at ways that you can help hone the language, so then you can start playing a better role in it. And then especially if it's the deal you're going to get to inherit as the proposal manager, then that just, again, it's going to help you as an individual proposal manager write a better story.
Well said, Len. As you said, always look for opportunities. Don't just, as we say, keep churning bids. As Len pointed, what happens before, what happens after a bid is super important. Rita has got a good question. After that, we'll get into Scribble Quest. Rita Masia asking, how do you counteract sales arguments that says it's too early to influence the buyer on a particular project. She gets that objections all the time. Nice question.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how far out that's occurring, because I'm a big believer, and I think I said this, that when you inherited you've won a contract, then your performance is going to start shaping the future automatically by good performance. But getting the program management and the operations team involved early to look for the opportunities where they can start adding more value. What you're doing there is you're starting to shape the future. Because if it's the kind of work that's going to be recompeted over and over again, then again, start adding that value in there. Because if the customer starts having that position of they don't want to live without you, then you're giving them a reason to award back to you by that performance and the value and the thought leadership. But if it's something that you've identified an opportunity a couple of years out, then it gets to the point where, will your company provide a business development person the right kind of funding to start talking to that client about, what they need, what they want. Different companies approach it differently, obviously. So I'd like to have a more personal conversation around that to understand the process and the timelines.
Perfect. Thank you, Len. I think Vanessa has mentioned a few more. I've liked using Kanban boards within teams. Makes project management easier when you need to be agile. This is for that virtual tool. And she also suggested a few more pointers, which is like in IT, specific to brands, machine type, and model combinations is a good clue for us to say who has shaped what. And also very specific social value requirements, trying initiatives to a very specific region or charities are a good clue from her experience. So thank you for sharing that. So let's get into the Scribble Quest. Let's see how attentive you were. And three questions comes from Len Stock. So question number 1. Len mentioned, if your BD person has shaped the opportunities really well, a form of procurement will happen. What was that form of procurement? Very, very close. Yeah, so I think sole source, direct award, I give you both, Carrie, Nicole. That's good. Well done. The next question is, while shaping the benefits, Len mentioned you need to shape it for the buyer, I need to shape it for you, and then you need to shape it for who? Oh, Carrie, you are amazing. Well done, Carrie. You're super quick. Yes, it's industry. Ooh, Carrie wins 2. Nicole leads back. So I'm going to go easy on this, or maybe I lost this. It's a subjective part. Len mentioned never go alone on your talk with your buyer. Why? I know this is a long answer. I'll just leave for anybody to just answer, which what Len mentioned, which is related to an interesting principle. Nice. I think Christina got it. Christina said they may hear something you did not, but there is one more. People hear different things. That's right, David. What's being said? Yeah, Rita also nailed it. Other things, which is like, they may pay attention to what's being said. Don't worry. The answer is everybody gets a point. Everybody will be sent a code to unlock. So I think that's about it for Scribble Quest. And what I'll say that is, or would you like me to ask one more question? Okay, let's ask one more question. Very rarely we kind of go through. Okay. Question is, this is very easy. Smaller companies, as you mentioned, you just need to go and shape these opportunities yourself. What does the larger companies do? What does the larger companies do to shape?
Oscar, was that a question to me?
No.
Oh.
No. Yeah, Rita says play golf with influencers. That's very close, Rita. But Len said they use somebody. Okay. The the answer was lobbying. I think Sudeep, you got it. You missed the L. It's lobbying, but I'll give it to you, Sudeep. So that's it. Thank you for joining. What happens next? So today we had Len. Len kindly came back and talked about shaping. Next week, we have managing proposal teams powerfully with Janet. So again, all the upcoming webinars and stuff, it's all available. You know where it is, but let me add it in the chat box. Any final question, drop it. We will keep you posted on the other things. Otherwise, thanks again for joining the webinar. Hope you enjoyed it. Please do share your feedback to me and the team, and let's see how we can improve. And we close that one. So thank you again. Thanks, Len. Thanks for everything. And thanks every single one of you.